Welcome to Manage the Content Lifecycle in Office 365. I'm your presenter, Erica Toelle, my Office 365 MVP from Seattle. So today we'll be talking about, obviously, the Office 365 content lifecycle, but what does that really mean? Well, we'll be breaking down the lifecycle into 4 areas. They are create, coordinate, harvest, and protect. We're also going to be talking about what you can do today versus what you'll be able to do later. It's a big year for enterprise content management in SharePoint. And so we want to know what we can do now to set us up for success later. And then finally, we should always have a foundation of governance, security, compliance, and knowledge management in our organization and throughout all stages of the life cycle. So we'll be talking about what we can do for each one of these areas in each stage. So this is the content services life cycle as defined by Microsoft. So this is the image that they use on their website to define the life cycle. So in Create, you create information, collect it, and classify documents. In Coordinate, we share, discuss, and co-author content using groups, metadata, taxonomy, teams, flow, and Power Apps. Basically, this is your collaboration pillar. Next, we want to make sure we're always protecting our data. So everything we do should have a foundation of compliance and risk management within the lifecycle. So this is going to include things like information architecture, auditing, rights management or encryption, and e-discovery. And then finally, we want to be able to intelligently analyze, discover, reuse, search, and dispose of content. We've invested a lot of time, money, and energy into creating and collaborating and using the content. And so now we want to make sure that we're harvesting as much value as possible from it. So how can we reuse the content? How can people that need it find it quickly and easily? So when we break this down into SharePoint terms, the create pillar is really about productivity and governance, as is the coordinate pillar. The protect pillar is about our security and compliance features. And harvest is about knowledge management and, of course, the new Project Cortex. So now let's dive into create. So for create, we're going to focus on productivity and governance. So how do we create, collect, classify the documents that we need? So really we're going to look at how we automate the extraction of metadata and map it to our taxonomies. So first let's look at the big picture of create. Now this is an image from one of the Ignite sessions on Project Cortex. So first we need to import and get the content into SharePoint and Office 365. So this content can come from various sources, but in my typical engagements, it's everything from file shares to Documentum to on-premises SharePoint. And of course, way more sources. But then we need to be able to tag the content, organize it, and most importantly, be able to find it. So what are the content management capabilities that we have to organize and manage these assets? So that's where Project Cortex is really going to help us, is in the tag, organize, and find area. So when we import the content, we'll be able to classify and extract metadata and other information from it, and provide and gain insights and analysis on that data and what it is. Instead of it being a big black hole where who knows what's in that file share, we'll know a bit about what it is. So there's a couple things we can do right now to import data into Office 365. So first is you can migrate documents and even PST files. So first of all, of course, we can use the SharePoint migration tool. So this is a tool that Microsoft built that you can access in the SharePoint Admin Center. And then last year, Microsoft acquired Mover, which is really great about moving content from sources, non-Microsoft sources, into SharePoint. And then, of course, if you want to move email into Office 365, there's third-party tools to do that as well. I also mentioned that depending on when you're watching this, you might also have a potential fast track benefit to help you migrate to SharePoint. So fast track is a program that is included with your licenses, and Microsoft approved partners will do the migration for you. You can check that out by going to fasttrack.microsoft.com. So if you want to get to the migration tools, just log in to the SharePoint Admin Center. On the left-hand side, click Migration, and there you can click on Migration Manager, which is the SharePoint, the purpose-built tool from Microsoft. You can do the desktop tool, which is, or you can use Mover, which is more for other cloud content migrations. So if you do have, a lot of times people have Exchange PST files sitting around in file shares. Maybe the people have left the organization, but you need to keep them for compliance purposes, for e-discovery or retention. If you want to have those files available for the compliance tools, you can import them into the Office 365 Compliance Center. There's two ways to do this. You can do it through Drive shipping, or they have an import tool that you can run in the browser for smaller amounts of data. To do that, go to the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, click on Information Governance, the Import tab, and then you can create a new import job. And this is something that's available for both E3 and E5 license types. All right, so now that we've got all of our content into Office 365, let's talk about how we can tag, organize, and find the content. Of course, since the beginning of SharePoint time, we've always been able to tag our content manually, meaning we can add metadata to a document library or list and complete those fields. We can now, we also have the ability to use Azure Cognitive Service capabilities to do some classification. So if you would like to use that, you're going to need to develop your own tool to feed the documents into Azure Cognitive Services so it can process the documents and extract metadata. Of course, if we want to fill out content manually or metadata manually, this is what it looks like. You can just go ahead and edit the view in the document libraries and fill out the metadata. And then this is the list of cognitive services capabilities inside Azure, specifically in the area of AI and machine learning. I've put a red box around the areas that I think are most applicable for working with SharePoint data. So for example, the text analytics area allows you to process documents using for sentiment. So is it a positive or negative text block? Cognitive services will allow you to use what's called natural language processing. Basically, it reads the document as if a human was reading it. It'll pull out the most meaningful terms rather than just the terms that appear most frequently in the document. Another useful one is the form recognizer. So if you have content that's in a form, you can extract information from those documents. Like, for example, if your address field is always in the same place, you can extract that address data. And this is actually what we'll talk about later in Project Cortex, where Project Cortex has essentially integrated this form recognizer technology in with document libraries. So we'll see an example of that later. So if you want to use, another option is to use Power Automate. So Power Automate has a few features that are in preview. For example, the ability to read business cards, extract key phrases or key talking points, detect languages, do sentiment analysis, and then process text from images. So we can also do form processing, which is what I just described, where you can pull the address out of a PO. And then text classification, where you can extract the meaning from documents. So all of these are available now in Power Automate. Of course, it's in the expensive licenses, but you can start using that today. So another option for completing metadata is to use document library locations, and then in combination or instead of in addition to workflow. So, this has been around in a lot of versions of SharePoint on premises, but some people still don't know about it. If you go to your document library settings, you can click on the option to change default column values. So for any value or any column in your SharePoint library, you could set a default for that column. So if somebody, if you have multiple folders in your document library, you could set those as well as different defaults. So let's say that in my design folder, I always want to set the project phase as in progress. Because you wouldn't be putting things in the design folder that weren't in progress, I could set that default value different than, say, the initiate folder. I can also fill out metadata using, I keep saying Microsoft Flow. I know it was renamed, but my screenshot still says Flow, Power Automate. But when you either modify the file or upload it for the first time, you could use Flow to fill out any metadata value in that document library. This is particularly useful if, say you have different document libraries for different stages in a process, and if somebody moves a document to the other document library, it changes some of the metadata fields as well. But there's tons of applications for this. So another option in the future with Project Cortex is going to be the Content Center. So the Content Center is where you'll be able to create content processing models. So let's look at what that looks like. So we'll click Upload, which is in the bottom right screen, or bottom right corner of the screen. We'll click Go. We'll be brought to a documents library. We'll be able to select some documents for upload. And then when they're uploaded, it automatically completes the metadata for them. So for example, the notes or the file type. So let's look at what a real life example of that might look like. So for example, we have this purchase orders document library, and we're going to use Project Cortex, this is the integration that I was talking about with document libraries. So with Project Cortex, you'll have this AI builder option, and you can click that and choose create a model. This is going to essentially bring you into the Power Apps AI builder. So it's the same underlying technology, just easily integrated with document libraries. So we're going to create a model for our purchase orders. It says we're going to need 5+ documents that have the same layout. So this is to note, you need to have it be the exact same form layout for this to work. So here is my form. It's the same one we use for everything. And what it's done is taken a guess at selecting the different fields that might be applicable. So things like the address, the PO number, the date, etc. So I'm going to select the fields that I think are important. For example, the vendor and the date, and some other ones as well. And now when I upload any purchase orders to the library, it's going to upload them and then automatically complete that metadata into the library. Now, why is this important? Now I can kick off workflows based on the subtotal of the PO for approval. Maybe if it's under a certain amount, it goes to one person, and if it's over, it goes to another. I can even do things like kick off a process to automatically generate a receipt or even a check to pay the vendor. The possibilities are really endless with how you can integrate this in with your other processes once the metadata exists in a library. So if I look at the information and the metadata, you can see that that's all been completed. So now let's go on to the coordinate pillar. And this is where now our content has been added to Office 365. We have additional context and metadata added to it. Now, how do we collaborate and get value from the data? So here we're going to make sure that our metadata is always consistent, and we're going to look what solutions we can build based on the categorization of content. So in order to understand this section, I need to explain the Microsoft Graph. So if you aren't familiar with the Microsoft Graph, it's basically a network of knowledge about how you use Office 365 in your organization. So as an example, in a typical day, I might attend a meeting, and the graph knows that I have an item on my calendar. It knows who else is attending that meeting. It can tell who's joined the meeting and actually attended by who joined Microsoft Teams. It can tell what content was presented in the meeting, what information was in the follow-up email, and that's just one example. From that, it can start to infer things like, these are the people that I work with the most, because over time I meet with them a lot more often and maybe email them or message them in Teams chat more often than other people. So it starts to build a knowledge graph about my behavior in Office 365, and then connects that to other individuals, teams, groups, etc. So with that in mind, we'll talk about the Project Cortex Knowledge Network. So what Project Cortex is doing is mining the knowledge in that Microsoft Graph to help build knowledge relationships between ideas. So it's taking the idea of, I was in a meeting, and it's identifying what is the topic of that meeting. And it can tell by the names of the files I'm viewing, maybe the job titles of the people, subjects of emails, and content of the email body, names of meetings. It can tell kind of what important topics are in your organization. And now it can create a graph of different topics and different knowledge and information in your organization. So one example that you can use today is the stream transcription. So if you record a meeting in Microsoft Teams or upload a video directly to Stream, it's going to automatically generate a transcript for you. So you can quickly search for a certain idea in the transcript, and if you click on the timestamp, it'll take you directly to that place in the video. So this is really useful if maybe you remember that someone asked for something specific and maybe assigned you an action item, but you can't remember what it was exactly. You can quickly jump to that place in the video and rehear the information. Or if you didn't attend the meeting because maybe there was just one topic that was relevant to you, you can jump directly to that topic and watch the video instead of having to watch the whole meeting. Another thing that you can do is have conversations around documents in Microsoft Teams. So a lot of people don't know you can do this. Oftentimes you'll be working on a document and you'll want to ask somebody a question or get their input. So within Microsoft Teams, you can open the document within Teams and start a conversation about the document on the right-hand side. Now, what this does is adds additional context to the document and the collaboration around that document and adds it to the knowledge graph, the Microsoft graph. Another thing coming soon with Project Cortex is a revamped term store and content type gallery. Now, we actually have a first version of this in our Office 365 tenants now. The content type gallery is actually rolling out right this second, but I have it in at least a few of my tenants. So this is going to finally update to a modern user experience. It's going to provide things like an increased term and synonym limit for term stores. It's going to introduce new REST graph APIs, promote interoperability in bulk term management. So if you manage if you have a master source of your terms in something outside of Office 365 and use a different taxonomy tool, you'll be able to sync those with the term store more easily. It'll offer support for related terms and offer targeted syndication. If you've ever tried to work with content types in SharePoint at an enterprise level, it can be really difficult to push those out to individual sites to be used and have them all sync correctly. So in the new content type gallery, we'll be able to push out content types to hub sites and the hub site members and syndicate the content types that way. Same thing with the term store. So that's exciting news. Anything that you start doing now in the term store and the content type gallery will translate later. It's just an upgrade. It's not a completely new service, so there won't be any migration needed or any rework. It'll just add functionality. So just as an example, if you were to create a new content type, you can designate hub sites where you want this content type to appear, and then have that appear in your document libraries. So that brings us to a suggestion about what to start doing now. So if you've been using SharePoint for a while, it's time to move away from the hierarchy sites into the hub and spoke model. So this idea is that you have a hub site, maybe for different departments in your organization, or whatever makes sense, like a project hub site for all your projects. And then you attach other site collections or team sites to the hub site. You can see from the content type example that the new functionality is going to be moving towards using hub sites to group information or push it out or roll it up. So the sooner that you get on the hub site model, the better for your long-term value out of SharePoint. So now let's look at how we can protect our data and what security and compliance features really play well with the content lifecycle. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at sensitivity labels. And this is something that you should start working on right now. The screenshot shows it in preview, but it's not. It's in general availability now, so I'll update that. So sensitivity labels are generally high-level security classifications for your content. Most organizations have these defined, but it's things like marking your content as highly confidential, maybe public or general use. Typically, there's only a few categories. And then you would use these categories and apply them to individual documents directly from the Office client. You can also apply them to containers such as SharePoint sites or team sites. And when a label is applied, it can bring along protections, such as if it's labeled as highly confidential, then encrypt the document, add a header that marks it as being highly confidential, and don't allow anyone to forward it in an email. So it's a great way to easily apply protections to content. I'll show you in just a second why it's so important to start doing this now. But the short answer is that as Office 365 adds more functionality, like Project Cortex, where maybe you don't want people to have access to certain information, it's going to look to these sensitivity labels and use that as the container that you can block from being used in the solution. So specifically, if a document is marked as highly confidential, then have Project Cortex ignore it for knowledge sharing purposes. So it's really important to start using these sensitivity labels now rather than later, so that your sensitive data isn't exposed as information becomes more available to people across Office 365. And also these labels are available for E3 or an E5 license. So this is an example of what sensitivity labels look like in an Office document. You can see that there is an item on the ribbon called sensitivity, and that I can see the different labels that are available for the document. Another thing that you should start doing now is applying retention to your documents. So every organization should think about the retention and deletion of content so that it doesn't get old and stale, and also so it isn't sitting around causing undue risk for legal discovery. So even though they're called the retention policies, they're also used to delete things, so I think of them as retention and deletion policies. But at the very least, you should apply some general retention policies to broad locations, such as, delete emails after 10 years. I know that's a controversial one. People don't want their email deleted, but it does create a liability if it sits around forever. Or you might say, delete SharePoint content 3 years after it was last modified, as an example. Of course, if you are in a more highly regulated or government organization, you might have more strict records management requirements, and you can meet those with the Office 365 compliance features, although it might require more of an advanced compliance license, such as E5, to really meet those requirements. So what does that look like? Well, if I go in a document library, I already have a field called retention label. If a retention policy has been deployed to that location, I can add it as a column in the view of my document library and just fill it out as if I'd fill out any other metadata on the library. And then the retention policies will be automatically applied once the document has been labeled. So another thing that you can start using are retention classifiers. So Microsoft this year in 2020 has released some pre-built classifiers and then the ability for you to build other classifiers. Now these are really tailored more towards compliance purposes, and you can find them in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. The pre-built classifiers are right now resumes and source code. The idea being that you can use the classifier to scan all of your content in Office 365, and if it finds a resume, it can apply a retention or even a protection policy. You can use these classifiers across most of the features in the Compliance Center, but definitely retention as well. If you want, you can also build your own custom classifier. To do that, you're going to need a lot of sample documents, both strong and weak examples of the type of document that you want to identify. And then in the next step, you'll also need documents that aren't an example of the content you want to classify. So it is a bit time consuming and requires some upfront prep, but it really pays off in the end because you don't have to worry about putting things in the right place in order to protect them and apply the right retention or deletion policy. So what does that look like? Well, in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, on the left-hand side, you can click Data Classification, and then on the Trainable Classifiers tab. And this is a list of all of the ones that are ready to use. A lot of these are more tailored towards compliance solutions such as communication supervision to supervise emails for bad behavior. So the two that are useful for content lifecycle management are resumes and source code. And then if you want to create your own classifier, click Trainable Classifier there in the UI. So now let's talk about harvesting information. So this is where we're really looking at getting knowledge and value from your organization, finding information when you need it, and also proactively serving up information to people that it might be useful for. So in order to make the findability as strong as possible, the more information that you can feed into the Microsoft Graph, the better your results from things like Project Cortex and knowledge management will be. For example, let's say that you had your email and calendar in G Suite, but you're using Teams and SharePoint. It's going to miss a lot of context from not having the information in your emails and calendar to help build the relationship map between who you're meeting with, what you're looking at, etc. So the more you can get in here, the more value you're going to get in the long run from this investment. So here's an example. Let's say that you wanted to build a Q&A solution, and you wanted that to be in the Office Graph. So Yammer has a really great question post type where you can put in the question and then somebody can come in and answer it. And then not only can you have multiple answers to the question, but the person who originally posted the question can mark something as being the best answer. Now, why is that important? Well, now you've told the Office Graph that this is a common question and that of all the discussion that happened on the question, this is the exact answer. Now that becomes a Q&A knowledge pair that we can leverage in other areas of our organization where maybe this question's being asked, like Teams. So what does this all amount to? So once we have Project Cortex set up and we are harvesting our knowledge from Office 365, we'll be able to do things like this. So here we are in an email conversation, and you can see that there's a blue underline under the acronym CORE. Now, this is something that was done automatically for us. And when we hover over that acronym, it's going to bring up a card containing information about the acronym. So now we know that the acronym stands for Construction Operations Reliability. I can follow the topic. I can see a description of the project, the people involved, things like the resources, common PowerPoint decks or recordings, related topics, and the start and end date of the project. Now, I don't know about you, but one of the hardest things about starting in a new organization, which I do a lot as a consultant, is understanding all of their acronyms and finding out what I don't know, or, I can't ask about what I don't understand. So this is a great way to kind of make that on-ramp time a bit shorter. Now, this same functionality is also available in SharePoint pages. So you can see it's underlined some terms there. If I hover over, it brings up the same card. So if I actually click to learn more information, it's going to bring me to the Knowledge Center, which is a new site template available with Project Cortex. So here, the AI has automatically generated an overview of the project, and it's told me that it pulled that description from the Project Core Customer Opportunity and Analysis document. You could also have a person curate this description, no problem, but the AI is going to try to write you one initially. It's also going to show you people that are involved with the project, as well as if they have a description for them, or again, you could edit that yourself. You can see here project resources that have been actually curated by individuals, and then discovered are ones that the AI thought might be useful. And then here you can see our knowledge graph that shows us what topics are related to the construction operations reliability project. So as an example, if I just started on this team, I might not have heard of project or Mark 8 project yet. I could click on that to learn more. And then here's our Q&A from Yammer. So we can tell that, so Yammer has decided that this is a question that's related to this knowledge topic, and it's added it to the page. So now is an example of if I had clicked on that Mark 8 project from the knowledge graph, it'll bring me to a similar overview page for that project. Another new site template that's available with Project Cortex is the Knowledge Center. So this shows my contributions to knowledge in my organization on the right-hand side, including topics that I've contributed to, questions I've answered, areas of expertise, what topics I think I have expertise in, and then topics that I follow. It's also going to show me trending knowledge topics among my colleagues or my organization. So for example, it's showing me cards related to projects, events, organizational level things, etc. I can learn more information by clicking on one of those cards, and it'll take me to the topic page for that area. At the bottom of the screen, it's also prompting me to help answer a question from Yammer. So because I have expertise in this area, it thinks I might be able to provide an answer. And then we have a suggested for you section, which shows me maybe documents or knowledge topics or even LinkedIn learning courses that I might like. And again, it's able to do this type of trending and things I might like because of that information in the Microsoft graph that I was talking about earlier. So just pointing out that this is in fact a SharePoint page because it's a normal site template. So I can edit the page just as I could any SharePoint page in a modern site. I can add web parts to the page, and with Project Cortex, we'll get new knowledge web parts that are specifically for this type of a knowledge center. So just want to point out that even in Word documents, you can look up acronyms. So here I see Project Core. I don't really know what that is, so I'm going to highlight it, right click, and then I'm going to choose Smart Lookup, which is kind of in the middle of the box just below the cut, copy, paste area. And then it will bring up that same good old knowledge card that we've been seeing everywhere. And I could learn more information by clicking on that. This type of an experience also applies to Microsoft Teams. So here, Emily and Lynn are having a conversation. She just has a quick question, and Lynn goes ahead and answers Emily's question. And we have this knowledge bot that's also a part of the conversation. And Lynn's going to message the knowledge bot and say, hey, at knowledge, add this question and answer as a part of the construction operations reliability project. So without having to actually go to the page and do anything, they've added knowledge to that curated page. And then the bot replies that they'll do that, and you can click OK. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour in how to manage content in the Office 365 lifecycle. We're really in a unique time for content lifecycle management in Office 365, where, you know, all the good the stuff that you've been relying on for the past 20 years of SharePoint, it still works just fine. But now we're finally getting to the point where we can leverage all of that work and all of that knowledge that's locked inside these document libraries in more meaningful ways. So the investments that you're making now will pay off later. Project Cortex, or my prediction, no one's announced this, but this is just my prediction, is that Project Cortex is going to be the first of many tools that Microsoft's going to build that leverage the Microsoft graph and the knowledge available in that graph to help unlock more value from the information assets you already have. So to be able to take advantage of that, get your content into Office 365 and therefore the Microsoft graph. It takes a while to do this, so if you don't do it now, you might be behind your competitors later when they're better positioned to take advantage of these new features. Also, you need to focus on getting baseline security, risk management, and protection policies implemented now, so that when you want to use something like Project Cortex, you aren't accidentally exposing the secret merger and acquisition. Metadata, taxonomy, content types. We haven't heard a lot about these lately in the SharePoint world, but they're back, baby. Reinvest in them. They're getting a refresh. They are still as meaningful as ever and will be a foundational piece of things like Project Cortex. With that, here's my contact information. I love answering questions about enterprise content management and security and compliance. So please, if you ever have a question, hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter. You can even email me. I have a blog at howtouseoffice365.com. And have a good rest of your day.